This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview.
Well, joining us today is David Horgan, is it CEO? It's MD, isn't it, really?
I suppose chairman now. I'm chairman of the company. It's
chairman, right? Perfect. Okay,
that's chairman. Yeah.
Fine. Well, joining us today is David Horgan, the chairman of Clontarf Energy, following an update from the company's Bolivia Lithium brines project, and of course the publication of the company's finals. So, thank you very much for joining us today again, David. How are you?
Very good, thank you, Mark.
Well, thank you for your time. So let's talk about Bolivia. That's the main focus of the company. You've had this call to bids that's been going on, and it did not progress to phase 4 due to not meeting the credit rating requirements specified in the convocatoria. This was not. So how was this? Was this not foreseen, David? What's the situation with this?
Well, we are in phase 4, albeit there's now 4 different streams. I can take you through it. Basically, what happened is that it's not a bid round. In a bid round, typically you have one winner. It's not a bid round. It's a call for expressions of interest in people who are pioneering technologies, not necessarily direct lithium extraction, but any relevant technologies. And therefore, it's a formal process, but it's a much more open process than people might think. And when it was originally designed, they didn't have a lot of experience, the authorities, and as a result, they've had to change some of the parameters. For example, initially we were going to collect 6 tons of samples from 6 different salares or salt lakes. But then when they worked out the logistics and interaction with the local community, they worked out that it was going to be difficult to do that for 21 companies with infrastructural constraints. So then it was going to be sampled from 1 salar. And now the sampling phase has been postponed into this phase that we've now entered, the phase 4. And there were a couple of other changes like that. And one of the conditions that had been put in, probably by lawyers or accountants, is that they had a phase 3, which was financial capacity. And very sensibly, they wanted to look at your audited accounts maybe for 5 years. The problem is that we're okay because we've got like 20 years of audited accounts on the AIM market, but there are many innovative technology companies that may only be startups, and they may only have 1 or 2 years audited accounts. And there are companies from Asia and so on that have different standards. They won't have the gap rules and so on. And then they had another condition, which is they wanted a risk rating, which is effectively a bond rating. And I think what happened is there are advisors who don't know a lot about business, particularly European business, think that this is standard because it's standard for American companies. Almost every American company has a bond rating and issues bonds. It's quite standard. And Americans have full disclosure. You rarely find any problem with disclosure in the United States because SEC rules are so strict, certainly if you're listed. But that's not true everywhere in the world. Like even state-owned companies in, say, Asia, Russia, they tend not to publish their accounts, which we found when we were partnered with Rosa for many years. So it's a bit mysterious unless they're going to market. And when the Bolivians initially had a rating requirement of A3 or A- to some people, they thought this would be absolutely standard. They didn't see it as a barrier. They just saw it as a confirmation that you're a legitimate company. But of course, in Europe, your listeners will know that many companies in Europe are privately held. They're very rich companies, including off-takers that we were dealing with. They may have €1 billion or more in cash in the balance sheet. They may have been around for many generations, but they very often controlled by the family, especially in Germany, though not just in Germany. And they're quite secretive. I found this over many years. It's very hard to get a large German industrial group in the Mittelstand to reveal their financials, despite the best efforts of analysts. And we thought that we had resolved this technical issue, and we ticked the box by getting a major off-taker. I can't tell you the name; it's confidential, constraint. But they would easily fit the criteria of any bank, and in fact, they do have relationships with major continental banks. And the management was entirely supportive. But when it went before the board, which is dominated by family members, they were told, no, for 80 years, since World War II, we haven't revealed this information. We're not going to start now. So what do? So you couldn't go to a rating agency. They wouldn't even let us use the auditor statement or bank, private bank rating, which would be entirely satisfactory. So we had a scramble, and I called in all my contacts in Australia and London and elsewhere, and people were incredibly supportive and loyal. And I was worried because I thought that there might be some trading on foot of this last minute. This was like 24 hours before the end. And I found that, we were bailed out by a fantastic, a very large trading and industrial house who understood the problem immediately. So they provided their bond. And I thought that was that. But then at the last minute, the lawyers were on saying, well, that's the rating of your offtake partner. What about Clontarf Energy's rating? So you have to go back through the rigmarole saying that we're explorers, we're on the AIM market, we don't issue bonds, we fund with equity, not with debt. Anyway, between ourselves and the EU Commission, someone realized at the 11th hour or maybe 13th hour that this was all a bit ridiculous, because half the companies, including some of the most innovative companies, were going to be excluded. So they decided very sensibly to effectively drop the requirement. They still had a check on the financial capacity and credibility, but they dropped this arbitrary requirement for a bond rating, which is entirely sensible. So we've all 21 companies have moved from phase 3 into phase 4, where we get reviewed this month in more detail, and there may be supplementary questions. I'm going down again for meetings next week, and all that is going smoothly so far that nobody can predict the future. And then finally there'll be the hopefully the negotiation phase, and then the signing of convenios, which are like a initial contract. In the meantime, we're assembling our plant at a trusted location in northern India, and the last long lead items are being delivered, and we're going to organize large bulk samples, hopefully 300 tons from at least 2 solares, for sea freight to the plant location. We would rather have the plant at site, but the government has decided that they want the tests done at the location, wherever the location may be, whether in Europe or Asia or whatever. So we have to follow their instructions, and we're going to be running those full production tests. And after that, we hope to negotiate an arrangement whereby we deploy our plant to site, to one of the Bolivian solares. Okay. So I'm sorry for the punters, because many punters get confused. I mean, we all get confused. I get confused. But I think the best policy in the long run for everyone is to make full and proper disclosure. So as soon as we realized at the last minute that there was this issue, we made full disclosure. But I tried, insofar as I could, to signal that, it was a hurdle to be jumped over. It wasn't the end of the world. But it was panic. And anyway, we managed to resolve it. Not in time to get it out on the Friday, but we resolved it. And we thought the best way to fairly reveal it to the punters was in the interim statement, because if you try to cram it into an RNS, very hard to be clear about a complex subject in an RNS, because it's designed for a couple of paragraphs. Whereas if you have, say, 1,000 or more words in a chairman statement, you can get into the nuance and the detail and give people an understanding. Of course, you got to get through the quality checks of the nominated advisor, and rightly so. And I think that worked pretty well, because the price was up over 80% yesterday and it's up again today. And that is the endorsement of the market, which in the end is always right.
Sure. Okay. So in short, then that bond/credit rating requirement, what was dropped? So that is now a non-issue. The companies involved in that have moved on from that stage, and you've now progressed to that phase 4, where there are these different streams, and Clontarf is in stream 3. Could you just briefly explain the different streams and what happens during this process, the phase 4 process?
Yeah, in a way, this is quite an intelligent adjustment of the process, because they found that there are 21 companies of interest with different technologies, and but they were at different stages. There were some very good companies, 7 companies whose technology has not progressed beyond the lab. Now, everything starts in the lab. So I'm not disrespecting laboratory chemists, but if you have an actual operating plant, albeit all the operating plants at the moment are what we call hybrid, they're not exclusively direct lithium extraction. They're combined with other more traditional technologies. So what the government has sensibly done is it split it into maturity of the technology. So if you have a plant operating, effectively, or you claim to have a plant operating, in the case of the Chinese, arguably, you can go into phase one, stream one. I shouldn't use the term phase. Stream one of phase 4, which is those people who say they have an operating plant. That's one Italian player, which is really a water purification expert, and 3 Chinese state-backed companies. If you have plant operating experience in this or similar chemistry, you go into phase 2, which is a range of nationalities. If you are in the process of building a plant and you've established that the technology works at micro level, at lab level, but you don't have your full production plant yet, you go into phase 3, and there's a range of nationalities and technologies there. And then the people who are still at lab level are in phase 4. Sorry,
that makes sense.
Stop saying phase, in Stream 4.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very sensible thing. And in case punters think that we're going to be delayed, and some people think we're going to wait a year for Stream 1 and second year for Stream 2, that's definitely not the case. I mean, we're well down the road in terms of negotiating samples. In fact, we're one of the few companies that have actually already got samples, but not enough to satisfy the production engineers. They want more. And that process is well down the road. And I don't anticipate that being delayed. In fact, that's the reason why I'm going down next week to finalize all that. So we'll be, in cooperation with the authorities, we'll be collecting sample and shipping them. In a sense, it's not what we would have preferred, because there can be settling and the chemistry can change slightly. It might oxidize traveling thousands of kilometers, but we don't really have a choice, because it's a decision of the state that they wanted us to run the samples through the plant in a remote location rather than bringing it to Bolivia. So we have to deal with the world as it is. But I'm optimistic that we'll get through this phase and establish the technology as commercially and technically feasible.
Okay. So would Clontarf look to move up those streams then within the phase? So getting to Stream 2 with the plant experience, which I'm guessing comes from the pilot plant that's being currently constructed in India?
Yeah. I don't actually think the stream makes any difference.
Right.
What matters is we get the sample, the bulk sample, and we've been very successful, partly by being by stubborn and insistent and not taking no for an answer. No reason to think that approach won't continue to issue dividends. So basically, if we establish to their satisfaction on site visits to India and through the actual operation of the pilot plant that the technology does scale up, I'm optimistic that we can then negotiate the next phase. So it won't matter what stream you call it will be.
Okay, right.
And I think that's the view of the European Commission. They want as many European companies in this process as possible, because nobody can predict the future. Nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. Yeah. It's a very sensible approach.
So this is a European framework then? This is not a Bolivian government, these phases?
No, the phases are Bolivian government, but they've established a good relationship with the Europeans,
right?
Because they have a difficult relationship for historical reasons with the US. I can take you through it in detail if you want, which is a pity because a lot of good technology comes from the US, and their experiences with the Chinese and Russians have not been altogether satisfactory, particularly with the Chinese. Okay. So they see the Europeans as maybe more user-friendly for them, with more cash and fewer strings attached. So there's a budding romance between the European institutions and the Bolivian government, and we want to make the most of that, and hopefully it lasts for a long time.
Okay. So what is going to happen sort of during phase 4 then, and then after? What's the outcome that comes after phase 4, and how long do you think it's going to take?
They're aiming to have it finished by June, and up to now they've been pretty good with their deadlines. People think Latins are not punctual, but they've been pretty punctual so far. And they are under pressure. They have an election next year. They want to show early results. And the country is not yet exporting battery grade lithium, and that must be immensely frustrating for the country with the cleanest, the lowest cost source of brines by far in the world. And they see the Aussies, developing fast in Southern Africa, and even their neighbors in Chile and Argentina making progress. So they're impatient to get moving. And again, we're offering a solution that works for them. So we're all aligned now. We want to move forward.
Okay. And so what's the outcome? What's the desired outcome of phase 4 and what comes after that?
That we get through this review satisfactorily. They've already reviewed us and passed us, but this is a more detailed review than the initial review in phase 1 and then technology review in phase 2. And, that's what we're involved in at the moment. So it's fairly intensive in terms of information transfer, which is a very good sign.
Okay.
I always think in an interview that if the interviewer is writing lots of notes, that's a good sign. And if they're bored and looking out the window, that's not so good. So far, the authorities seem pretty keen on what we're doing.
Okay, and at the completion or the conclusion of phase 4, does that unlock something like a next stage, or is it a key milestone point?
Yeah, they will then send their technical people to visit the site and to see it in operation.
Okay,
and we then enter into negotiations. Up to now, we haven't touched on fiscal terms, and it'll be useful to have the European institutions involved on that, because the collective offering that we're making, it's a lot of cash for infrastructural development that would be lent by institutions, whether member state institutions or EU institutions, or their backers, to the government of Bolivia for expenditure in appropriate infrastructure projects. We're talking billions there, so that's a lot of money at a time when cash is short in Latin America. And that's what's giving a lot of urgency to this process.
Okay. And just touching on the finals then that were announced, of course, recently as well, just a couple of elements here. Well, the oil and gas element, do you want to just briefly make a comment on how things are with that project? Because it seems like it's sort of on hold at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the game that juniors have to play in oil and gas projects, particularly in the offshore, is a farm out game, basically. You can raise a certain amount of money in good times, and we've done that. And you can drill low cost wells. Like we just did one a couple of years ago offshore Australia. But it's easier and better to use a sugar daddy's cash than your own cash. And that's a strategy that's worked for us for 30 years. Like we've had about 25 farm outs. Most of them are not discoveries, because that's just the odds. The odd one is a discovery. And then when it's a discovery, all the shareholders complain. They say, oh, why did you give away 80% to BHP or Woodside? But of course, they don't say that if it's not a discovery or if it needs a lot of capital for development. And the farm out market has bluntly been dead since 2014. Like we did a good farm out in another company 2013, 2014 with Woodside and the Irish offshore, which worked really well, a very great partner. But that interest has subsided even for relatively hot areas over the last decade, which is a long time. And equally, there's not a lot of punter interest in London. There's some in Australia, but there's not a lot of punter interest yet in London for a number of reasons. It's, Boris Johnson's Green New Deal. It's Greta Thunberg. It's fashion. It's a lack of understanding about fundamentals. But every year, if you look at the supply-demand balance, it's tightening every year. And it's remarkable how tight the OPEC plus arrangement has been since about 2016. So the fundamentals, I would say, are actually stronger for crude oil now than for copper. But that's not the perception of the market. So, the market's always right. So our view is that we will maintain our projects. We will look at new projects. We will maintain our relationships. And when the market turns, which it can do quite suddenly, and we've seen this in different cycles before, we're ready to push ahead, ratify contracts, and develop new projects. We certainly haven't given up on reliable oil and gas.
Okay. And finally, David, just looking again at the finals there, you talk about the companies continuing to advocate its position with proof of technology and EU financial support. So what's going on with your relationship here with the EU Commission and getting some financial support to prevent the need to go to the market?
Yeah, I mean, the Commission is motivated by the desire to secure clean critical resources. They have an act that they just passed, which specifies 34 critical minerals, which includes lithium, but also many other things like nickel and copper and so on. And of those, 17 are strategic, including lithium. And lithium, in a sense, is their biggest priority at the moment because it has a big value-added impact in terms of the green transition, like in EVs, but also battery storage and high-tech new applications. And it's one of the sectors where China does not have a big mining presence, only about 10% of mined presence, but dominates most of the processing. So it's an immediate vulnerability for the US and Europe. And accordingly, they see it as a number one priority where it has a big bang for the buck if you develop independent, clean, green sources of lithium. And the main source of clean, green lithium is the lithium triangle in South America, unless you want to drill and blast in Southern Africa or Australia. And because of the historical links and the language and so on, it appears to be their main priority as we speak. It's not the only priority. You've got cobalt, and you've got rare earths and so on. But the focus has initially settled on lithium brines.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today and that update, David Horgan, the chairman of Clontarf Energy.
Many thanks, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.